Hey everyone, this is going to be the topic lecture for the November and December 2023 Public Forum Debate topic, which is resolved the USFG, or the United States federal government, should forgive all federal student loan debt. We're going to start by giving an overview on the topic, go over arguments that both the pro and the con side can make, and then conclude our thoughts. Let's start with an overview. How big of a problem is student debt actually? And it's really important to understand the magnitude of the topic that you're going to be debating. So as of right now, there are over 44 million people who have borrowed money for college, and they all owe a total of $1.6 trillion. What would forgiving student debt be, and how would it look like, and how would the resolution be implemented? The resolution would be passed by the government, who would pay off these loans. An interesting point of debate could be whether or not these loans will be paid off in one lump sum payment. Another alternative that a team could propose is that the sum will be paid off in multiple installments. And the debate on whether or not it would be paid in a lump sum could have many implications on arguments relating to inflation, which we'll discuss a bit more later. One important thing to note here is that under the resolution, the only debts that will be paid off are loans that are federal. What this means is that only loans that are owed to the federal government will be forgiven. So for example, if a student took a loan through any different avenue that wasn't the government, like a private corporation or another entity, those loans would not be covered under this resolution. And as a debater, it's really important for you to do the research and find out how much of all the money owed is through federal loans and how much is through other entities, because that can act as a really severe mitigating factor for any other arguments that you may want to read. What are the current plans and methods for how this loan plans to be forgiven? And this is really important to understand because it gives us a signal or an idea as to what will happen when the resolution itself is actually passed. It's called normal means. So right now, under the current plan, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have a specific federal loan forgiveness program where if you make less than $15 an hour, you won't have to pay any loan payments. And if you make more than that, you will get a loan break proportional to your income. In fact, just 1 month ago, Biden and Harris both approved a $45 billion plan that would forgive over 620,000 people who had outstanding loan payments. And the reason why this empiric is so important is because as a debater, you should be looking at what happened in the economy and in our policy after this was passed, because it's a signal of what will happen on a much, much larger scale when you actually pass and implement the resolution. And it's a very useful empiric that you can use in all of your debates for mechanisms for weighing and just comparison in general. Now, we should also talk about how these loans actually work, since we're going to need to properly understand them in order to debate this topic. There are plenty of different types of federal loans, and here are some common ones. There's direct subsidized loans, which are based on financial need, and the government covers the interest while you're in school. There's direct unsubsidized loans, which are available to both undergraduate and graduate students, with interest start accruing after the loan is dispersed. And then there's also direct plus loans, which are for graduate students only, and the parents of dependent of undergraduate students with eligibility based on creditworthiness. There are also loan limits, so that each student actually has a limit on how much money in loans they can take from the federal government. This limit is often lower for undergraduates and higher for graduate students. So that kind of sets a cap on how much there could actually be in the future. So if opponents try to make an argument about some kind of longer time frame about loans becoming worse and worse, it's important to understand that there are limits on what can be loaned at one point in time. Then there's also interest rates. So federal student loan interest rates are set by Congress and can vary from year to year. These rates are fixed for the whole life of the loan and are usually lower than private loan rates. So what this means is that the interest rates can't be changed throughout the term of the loan, and they're only fixed, which means even if market conditions change, the loan interest payments will not. In cases of financial hardship, a lot of students can also request deferment or forbearance to postpone payments. Now, let's talk about arguments that can be read on the pro side in this debate. This side is going to be arguing that the United States federal government should pay off federal loans and forgive the debt. The first argument is going to be surrounding racial inequities and how forgiving these student loans could possibly alleviate them. The uniqueness for this argument is that right now in the status quo, debt from loans only exacerbates racial inequality. Since Black Americans are already facing a wealth disparity, they're more likely to take out loans more often, and more loans means more interest payments, creating a cyclical effect of poverty. Additionally, there's also really good statistics which show that loans are actually harder for Black Americans to pay off because there's a lot of discrimination in the workplace, which means they actually can't get jobs in the first place. So if they're unable to get jobs because of discrimination, that means that these loans are a poor investment for them because they no longer have the financial means to pay off what they're already into for debt. The way that the resolution solves is obviously by forgiving this debt. And this argument will most likely be read along with a framework or some sort of argument about prioritizing racial minority groups. If your opponents read this argument, they will most likely make the claim that this will forgive all debt that currently exists because of college across all age groups, which means that even if there's a 50-year-old who currently has outstanding debt payments on loans that are from federal student loans, those are still going to be taken care of, which means that across the entire board, there'll be a clean slate, which will be one step closer towards fighting the wealth disparity that is a part of the systemic racism system in America, which is going to be a narrative that your opponents are going to be making a lot if they read this argument. Next, another argument that can be read is about the economy. So one really compelling reason that a lot of people are going to give for the federal government to forgive student loans is the potential for economic stimulus and financial relief. Since a lot of people are burdened by these student loan debt payments, it's taking a lot of money out of their pockets. However, if the government were to take care of all these debt payments, they would immediately have much more money in their pocket. When people have more money in their pocket and they have more money to spend in general, this will lead to more injection of money in the economy and more consumer spending. When there's more consumer spending, this money can be spent on goods, services, and investments. And the injection of this cash into the economy will only increase the GDP more. And you can also read impact uniqueness saying that this is really good right now because we need more GDP growth in order to alleviate the effects of COVID-19 that are still lingering. Then, here's some specific statistics about the economy that you can actually read in your debates. A lot of studies find that over 1.5 million jobs will be created as a result of student loan forgiveness because there's going to be less administrative costs, which we'll discuss more later. Additionally, over 5.2 million families will be lifted out of poverty because they no longer have to pay interest payments on their debt. And finally, just to understand the scope of the argument, 38.3 million Americans will be freed of making any debt payments at all, which is over 10% of the entire population. This is a number that you should regularly be using in your scope weighing debates. Another argument that the act can read is about increased civic participation, or in other words, voter turnout. You can very well make the argument that as a whole, the population of people who have outstanding loans will have more trust in the government if the government pays all of their student loans off. This argument can be especially powerful if you make the claim that in the status quo, many young people aren't voting because they aren't satisfied with either political party. However, if loans, which will primarily be from young people because they're most likely to be in debt and fresh out of college, if these loans are paid off, they'll be more likely to vote, particularly for the Democratic Party, as the Biden-Harris administration would oversee this plan. From here, you can read impact uniqueness saying that the 2024 election campaigns are happening right now, and that it's important for Democrats to make a move to drastically improve their chances. From this, you can terminalize an impact by citing any sort of literature which explains why Democratic policies are better than Republican ones in terms of the economy, social issues, or the environment. Another argument that can be made is that if you forgive federal student loans, that will actually increase entrepreneurship. Since many people who have significant student loan debt right now delay starting their own businesses because they don't have any extra money. When you forgive the student loan debt, you'll actually be putting more money in people's pockets. This will give them more financial freedom and also encourage them to take more calculated risks because they have more money to play with. This is really important because it has two main impacts. One, more entrepreneurship and innovation because of more money will not only increase GDP growth, but second of all, it's also going to increase the US's ability to compete on the global stage. You can make the argument that right now, US hegemony is declining. However, if we see a significant boost in entrepreneurship, you're going to see more innovation, which will allow the US to reclaim its stage, reclaim its place as a global power. Next, another argument that the AF will probably make is about administrative costs. So, forgiving federal student loans can significantly reduce administrative costs associated with the collection and the management of student loan debt, since there's plenty of federal agencies, loan servicers, and institutions who are spending a lot of resources on servicing and collecting all this debt. once you sign an executive order to pay off all the debt, these organizations and resources will now be free to do other more productive things. These could be things like increasing investments in education, training other people for jobs, or other programs that directly benefit students and workers. And when you reduce the overhead that these administrative organizations have, that will save taxpayer dollars and also make sure that federal funds are directed to more efficient places that can actually help our society more. Mental health is also a really big argument that can be read. There's a lot of stress and anxiety associated with the burden of debt, which can have adverse effects on individuals' mental well-being. Forgiving federal student loans can provide a significant mental health benefit by relieving borrowers of the psychological distress caused by mounting debt. This can result in more improved mental health outcomes, which could reduce stress. And you can terminalize an impact from this by saying that if people are less stressed and less worried about having to have debt payments, they can be more productive in their work, which is only better for the economy. Additionally, finally, you can also make the argument that federal student loan forgiveness can encourage a sense of financial responsibility and also promote financial literacy among different borrowers. It's very true that many individuals enter into student loan agreements without a full understanding of the long-term financial implications. So the prospect of loan forgiveness can actually incentivize borrowers to become more educated about various financial literacy topics like personal finance, budgeting, and debt management as well. When you force people to make responsible financial choices, these people could even qualify for even better loan forgiveness programs in the future. So what you're doing by forgiving student loans is setting a precedent and starting a new positive cycle that will allow people to only make more responsible financial decisions. And you can link this into breaking cycles of poverty, because if people are able to get out of debt earlier and teach fiscal responsibility methods to their children as well, that will lead to generations of financial responsibility and wealth. Now, let's take a look at the arguments that can be made for the con side. This side is going to argue that the US federal government should not forgive all federal student loan debt. One argument that can be made is about fairness, and this is going to be a pretty popular theme in a lot of debates, especially if you have a parent judge. Here's how the argument goes. Usually, people who attend college and take out loans are able to pay them back very fairly. There's a lot of good data which indicates that the average college student with a bachelor's degree will earn over $1.2 million more in their lifetime than someone who only possesses a high school diploma. Furthermore, people who attended college statistically have much more job security than people who did not attend college. In fact, there's a really great empiric from COVID-19 which shows that in 2020, the unemployment rate for college graduates was only 8.4%. However, the unemployment rate was 17.6% for those who did not attend college. And this makes sense because if you have a college degree, your skills are less likely to be replaceable, and you're also more likely to have a greater chance of getting a job. So essentially, the con here is going to be arguing that by bailing out people with college degrees, the taxpayers, 2/3 of which don't even have a college degree, are going to be the ones who are suffering, because in essence, their money is being used to forgive loans for other people who made their own individual decisions. The next argument that the con can make is an argument about resource trade-offs. This is a more flushed out version or extended version of the fairness and morality argument, and it's definitely impact that you can read if you want to read the whole narrative about fairness. So this argument essentially says that the money, which is going to be allocated towards forgiving all this debt to the tune of $1.6 trillion, could actually be spent on other more meaningful government programs which can help the poor, such as social welfare, housing, education, medical aid, and etc. There are plenty of impacts that can be read here, and it's a great link to read off the morality argument. Another argument that can be made is that this policy is regressive. And what this means in the context of the economy is that lower income people are actually going to be hurt more than higher income individuals. The reason this is true is because under Biden's current plan, the top quintile earners would actually have more of their debt forgiven. Because even though it's counterintuitive, statistically, more high income people borrow more money for college than lower income students, which means that there's going to be negative progress being made on the wealth gap, only hurting the poor more. And this is a really good turn on the app argument that we mentioned before about racial inequities, because you're saying that not only are you not making any change in the wealth gap, but you're actually making it worse by giving more forgiveness to higher income individuals. And you can see what the forgiveness plan would look like based on the earned income of these households through this graph right here. Another argument that can be made is that passing this plan is unconstitutional. And this is pretty interesting because according to the Constitution and the Higher Education Act, it is unconstitutional for a president to authorize an executive blanket cancellation order for student loans. There can only be forgiveness under specific loan repayment programs. And blanket cancellation effectively means that there's a metaphorical blanket placed on all types of loans. However, it's unconstitutional for a president to sign an executive authority which allows that. It can only be under very specific conditions. The impact for this argument you can make can be twofold. First, you can say that this will eliminate all chances for the Democratic Party to win the election, especially if a sitting president who's a part of the Democratic Party commits such a gross violation of the Constitution. Second, you can also take the argument global and say that this will have a negative modeling effect on other countries, because a lot of countries who are currently on the brink of authoritarianism look to the United States as a model for democracy. However, if we are faltering internally, that will make other countries question whether or not our system really works and push them more towards the brink of authoritarianism, which contains the likes of Russia and China. And from there, you can read plenty of arguments that explain why authoritarianism is bad, because it kills people and is undemocratic. The final argument that we'll be talking about is probably the biggest argument that's going to be read on the con, which is inflation. And there's a number of ways that the con can actually link into the impact of inflation. The first is just that there's more money present in the economy, which is the exact same logic that we use in the AF, except for there, we said that that was good for the economy. So essentially, when the government forgives student loan debt, they're going to be taking money from the taxpayers and giving it to the borrowers. Now, even though the AF is going to argue that this is going to increase consumer spending and stimulate the economy, it is also going to lead to a higher demand for more goods and services, because people are going to have more money to spend and they're going to want to buy more stuff. Therefore, the demand will obviously increase. However, even though the demand is going to increase, there's not going to be a corresponding amount of goods or services increasing as well, which means that the supply will outpace the demand and the price will go up, leading to what we know as inflation. Another way in which the policy could cause inflation is through fiscal pressure. Since the government is going to have to finance the payment to forgive $1.6 trillion worth of debt, they will most likely deficit spend or print more money. Printing more money will obviously cause inflation, as we saw with the Biden COVID stimulus check plan. He authorized a plan for over $3 trillion. And even now until this day, we're seeing the effects of that plan because there's more inflation nowadays. Additionally, even if the government were to borrow more money, that would also raise interest rates on loans and cause businesses to raise prices in order to remain profitable, because they also have to take out loans in order to run their businesses. And if their prices go up, that also leads to much more inflation. Additionally, there is also a problem of moral hazard when it comes to passing the resolution. Forgiving all student debt can signal to borrowers that they don't need to be held accountable for their financial decisions. This could lead to even more riskier borrowing policies in the future, because if people know the government is going to bail them out, they'll know they're going to be more ambitious to make more hazardous purchases in the future. One really good example of why this is so devastating was back in the 2008 financial bubble. Back then, every single person was taking out a mortgage on a home, even though they knew they could not afford it. They just thought they would take care of it later. But eventually, when it came time for all these people to pay up, they all defaulted on their loans, and all the banks collapsed, leading to a massive crisis that pushed hundreds of millions of people into poverty. What this argument is saying is that if you set up the same precedent, another housing crisis could happen in a different sector if you allow people and give them the signal that it's okay to borrow without any accountability, which is why forgiving the debt would be bad. And then the main impact that a lot of teams are going to be reading for the inflation argument is going to be related to cyclical poverty and death, which are pretty standard impacts. Now, let's just quickly recap what we've learned. There's a lot of clash on all these arguments, as you've seen through all of the AF and neg arguments. There's plenty of ways where you can go both ways on the link level, but you'll have the same impact. That is why link weighing and knowing your argument the best is going to be super important. Most of the time, you and your opponents are going to be having the same impacts, whether it's solving racial inequality, lifting people out of poverty, or saving lives. The way in which teams are going to differentiate themselves is by weighing their link into those impacts. And this can be through saying that, oh, my link has more probability, or my link is through a longer time frame. You just have to explain why your link into the impact is better, and it'll be easier to win debates. Of course, you should also know your arguments very well, better than your opponents, and you should also have the most recent evidence which analyzes the most recent trends. But yeah, I hope this lecture was really informational for you, and I wish you all the best in the season. Thank you for watching.